Good morning, second graders. Happy Thursday. This is our lesson for April 2nd. We're looking at lesson 5 today. We're going to be reading chapter 1 from our reader called Trouble with the British. You can find this story in your ELA packet. It's going to be the one that says page 12 at the bottom. You'll see what that looks like as we keep going. Let's start reading. Like I just said, our story for today is going to be called Trouble with the British. All right, today we're going to look at the vocabulary that we'll see on each page before we start reading the page. So we've got some words that we're going to see on the first page of our story. The first word is British. This word is British is a word for the people who are from Great Britain. Next word that we'll see is U.S. Congress. U.S. Congress is the people who are elected to make the laws for the United States. This phrase says declare war. Declare war means to officially say that one country will start a war with another country. This is the first page of our reader. You can find this in your ELA packet. It's going to be the page that has the picture of James Madison, and this is page 12 down at the bottom, just like my screen. The caption for this picture says that James Madison was the 4th president of the United States. We're going to listen to this page to see what did Madison have to do. Let's get started pointing to in 1812. Let's begin. In 1812, James Madison had a hard choice to make. Many Americans were angry with the British. Some of them were saying the United States should declare war on Great Britain. But others disagreed. They said the United States should not go to war. Madison was President of the United States. He had to decide what to do. Should he ask the U.S. Congress to declare war, or should he try to keep the peace? So going back to our question, what did James Madison have to do? Look back in the story to find your answer. James Madison had to decide what to do. He had to ask Congress to declare war or keep the peace. In this unit, we're going to be practicing taking notes. Since this is our first nonfiction story, this is our first opportunity to do this. When you read nonfiction stories usually teach you about something important. So often when we read nonfiction, we can take notes so that we can keep track of the important information. So on my whiteboard right here, I have the title of my story, Trouble with the British. And I'm going to take notes on the important things that we learn on each page. So on this page, we learned Madison had to decide if they would declare war or keep the peace. When I take my notes, I like to use bullet points. That's what this is called right here, this little dot. It's a bullet point and it tells me that's the start of my information. So I'm going to put that to the side and then I'm going to keep reading, see if I can find something else interesting on the next page. All right, turn to page 14. And let's read to find out what 2 countries in Europe were at war. At the time, Great Britain was already at war with France. The 2 countries had been fighting for years. Most of the countries in Europe were involved in the war. Some sided with the British, others sided with the French. So which 2 countries in Europe were at war? That's right, Great Britain and France were at war. So I'm going to go back to my notes. I'm going to put a bullet point. I'm going to say Great Britain and France were at war. Just like this. Great Britain and France were at war. Now let's keep reading. In this last paragraph, listen to see who led the French and what he was like. The French were led by a man named Napoleon. He was a brave leader. He had beaten the British in a number of battles. Still, the British kept fighting. So what was the name of that French leader and what was he like? Right, his name was Napoleon and he was a brave leader. So Napoleon a brave leader, led the French. Let's put another bullet point with that information. Notice the cool thing about taking notes is that we have all the important things from the story, but it's taking a lot less words and a lot less writing, so that when I go back to look at this, it's going to be an easy summary of what I read, a shorter version of what I already read. Let's turn the page and look at page 16. First, some vocabulary words that we'll run into. This word is trader. This word is? A trader is someone who exchanges something to get something in return. So for example, in this picture, the one person on the left is trading an orange for the banana on the right. They're making a trade, exchanging one thing for another. Let's start reading on page 16. I want you to think about what did most Americans think about this big war at first. The United States tried to stay out of this big war. At first, most Americans did not care to get involved. American traders wished to trade with both Great Britain and France, but this led to problems. When U.S. ships traded with the British, the French got upset. They did not want Americans trading with their enemies. When U.S. ships traded with the French, the British got upset for the same reason. So what did most Americans think about this big war at first? Right, they didn't want to get involved. They didn't want to be any part of it. So I'm going to put a bullet point and I'm going to say at first, Americans didn't want to get involved. There we go. I got it. First, the Americans didn't want to get involved there at the bottom. Let's keep reading and think about who did the Americans have problems with. Sometimes British ships would stop American ships to keep them from trading with the French. Sometimes French ships would stop American ships to keep them from trading with the British. The Americans had problems with both the French and the British. As time went on, the problems with the British increased. So who did Americans have problems with? The British and the French. So write that down. Americans had problems with British and French. Notice in my writing, I'm starting to use some symbols because when I take notes, I want it to be short and easy to go back to. So like right here, I have with. I just wrote a W with a slash. That means with. I didn't even write the whole word. Sometimes when you take notes, you can use what's called shorthand. You don't even have to write out the entire word. Here's some important vocabulary we'll see on the next page. This word is army. This word is an army is a group of soldiers that are trained to fight on land. That's different from the Navy. This word is the Navy is a group of soldiers that are trained to fight on ships at sea. This word is impressment. This word is, we talked about this in our introduction. Impressment is the state of being forced to serve in the British Navy. So that was when the British Navy was forcing people to serve on their ships. Let's start reading to find out why did the British need all the men they could get. The British had a strong army and an even stronger navy, but serving in the British Navy was a hard job. Some people quit. Others ran away. This was a problem for the British. They needed all the men they could get. How else could they defeat the French? The British spent a lot of time looking for men who had run off. From time to time, they would stop American ships. British officers would come on deck to look for British men. They would grab men and force them to serve in the British Navy. This was called impressment. So why did the British need all the men they could get? People were quitting the Navy and running away. They needed more men to defeat the French. So I'm going to write that down. British needed more men because theirs were running away and they needed to beat the French. Just like that. Notice I have some shorthand again. They said right here, B/C, that stands for because. A lot less words to explain the same thing they were talking about in the story. Let's finish up and try to find out why were the Americans angry about what the British did. The British said they only took British men who had run away, but they were not always careful. Sometimes they grabbed Americans. Stories about men taken by the British were printed in the papers. How do you think Americans felt when they read them? They felt angry. Some of them felt the United States needed to fight back. They said the United States needed to declare war on Great Britain. So why were the Americans angry about what the British did? Because they weren't being careful and they were grabbing British men. So Americans, I'm going to abbreviate that as AMER, just to make it even shorter for note-taking. Americans were angry because British were taking Americans. You notice I put a lot of abbreviations in this one. I said Americans, abbreviated that, were angry because British were taking Americans. So it's abbreviated Americans twice, abbreviated because, writing as little as I can so that I can just quick take notes and move on. Let's turn the page to page 20. Let's listen to find out what did Americans do as their country was growing. Impressment was one problem, but there were others. Many in the United States were also upset with the British for trading with Native Americans. In 1812, most Americans were farmers. At first, most farmers had homes near the East Coast, but then the country began to grow. People went west. They settled in places far from the coast. They set up farms. They planted crops. There was just one problem. There were already people living there. So, what did the Americans do as the country grew? They went west and set up farms. So Americans went west to build farms. And then, why was this a problem? Because people already lived there. So Americans went west to build farms, but people were already there. Let's read to find out who was already there and how they responded to these settlers moving onto their land. The settlers were moving onto land where Native Americans hunted and made their homes. Native Americans did not like this. There were many fights between settlers and Native Americans. So who lived on the land that settlers were coming to? The Native Americans. So Native Americans lived there. And how did they respond to the settlers coming and moving onto their land? They didn't like it, and there were lots of fights. So Native Americans lived there and fought to protect their land. There we go. Now we've got our notes for that page too. Lots and lots of notes. You'll be taking notes yourself as we keep going this week. But today you just get to watch me take notes. Okay, let's turn to the next page, page 22. Let's find out why the people in the United States felt like they needed to fight back. The British controlled Canada. They sent traders south from Canada to trade with Native Americans. These traders sold all sorts of things to Native Americans. The British said they had a right to trade with the Native Americans. But lots of people in the United States did not see it that way. They said the British were helping Native Americans attack American settlers. They felt they needed to fight back. So why did the people feel like they needed to fight back? Because they thought the British were helping Native Americans attack the settlers. So Americans wanted to fight because they thought British were helping Native Americans. Okay. Let's find out what some of the reasons were for not declaring war, because we know that James Madison had to decide whether they should or should not declare war. Let's see why maybe they shouldn't. You can see there were many reasons for Americans to be angry with the British, but there were also good reasons for not declaring war. A war causes death, wrecks towns, and costs a lot of money. Plus, Americans felt that the British would not be easy to defeat. President Madison and the men in Congress would have to think long and hard about declaring war. So why would they maybe not want to declare war? Right. So I'm going to say challenges. And the challenges were death, wrecked towns, money, and hard to defeat the British. It would be hard to win. So that's the end of our story. This is my last page of notes. So we read many, many pages today and ended up with just 2 pages of notes. So if we wanted to go back and look at this information again to clear up what we learned, it would be much easier to look at our notes because that's only 2 pages rather than to reread everything that we just read today. That's why taking notes is a very important skill to have. All right, here's your activity page for today and your opportunity to earn another Grow Our Team point. We're going to have these opportunities every single day. So keep watching our videos, liking and subscribing so that you can keep up with us. So this is going to be on activity page 5.2 in your ELA packet. It says Trouble with the British at the top. You're going to see multiple choice questions. You're going to circle the correct answer choice, A, B, or C, and then you're going to write down the page number where you found your answer. So remember, our story today started on page 12, ended on page 20. Remember that when you cite your page numbers, you want to make sure that you're putting pages with words and not pages with pictures because you're getting your answers from the words. The answers come from the words. You got it. This activity page is 2 pages today. You'll see this front one. And then when you flip it over, you'll see 2 more questions on the back side. So go ahead and complete activity page 5.2, questions number 1 through 5. When you're done, send that to your teacher so that we can enter your Grow Our Team points. Awesome job today. I'll see you tomorrow for our last lesson of the week. Bye-bye.